The 3 minutes Muhammad Ali sat in a neurologist's office, unable to answer the question, "What is your name?" His wife Veronica watched from the corner of the room and cried. Not because Ali was struggling, but because she'd known something was wrong for months, and this was the moment denial became impossible. The doctor repeated the question. Simple, direct, the kind of thing a child could answer. And Ali's mouth opened, but no words came. Just silence that stretched and stretched until the room felt like it was suffocating under the weight of what that silence meant. When Ali finally remembered, "Muhammad Ali," he said quietly, 8 seconds after being asked. Nobody celebrated. Because 8 seconds is an eternity when you're trying to remember your own name. And everyone in that room understood they just witnessed the beginning of something terrible that couldn't be stopped. Only endured. What happens when the most famous name in the world becomes a word its owner can't remember? And what do those 3 minutes reveal about the cost of being the greatest? Veronica had noticed the changes first, small things that accumulated over months until they couldn't be ignored anymore. It started in late 1979, Ali's speech slowing. Not dramatically, but noticeably, words arriving a half-second later than they should. He'd always been quick-witted, verbal, able to compose rhymes and insults on the spot. But now there were pauses, hesitations, moments where he'd start a sentence and seem to forget where it was going. At first, she'd dismissed it as fatigue. He was 37 years old, had been fighting professionally for nearly 2 decades, had absorbed punishment that would have killed lesser men. Of course he was tired. But then came the other things, the tremor in his hands that appeared even when he was resting, sitting on the couch watching television, hands in his lap shaking slightly like he was cold even though the room was warm. The way he'd wake up some nights disoriented, asking, "Where am I?" Even though they were in their own bedroom, the same bedroom they'd slept in for years. The way he'd tell the same story multiple times in a single conversation, not remembering he'd already told it, getting frustrated when someone pointed out the repetition. These weren't normal things. These weren't just aging or fatigue. Something was wrong. And when Veronica would try to talk to him about it, suggest he see a doctor, Ali would shut down immediately. "I'm fine. Just tired. Stop worrying." But she couldn't stop worrying. Because she'd watch him try to button his shirt in the morning and see his fingers fumble with the buttons. The fine motor control that boxing had demanded for decades suddenly unreliable. She'd watch him walk across a room and notice his steps were smaller, shuffling rather than striding. She'd look at his face during conversations and see a blankness in his expression, a mask-like quality where emotions didn't register the way they used to. When does concern become fear? When does noticing become knowing? For Veronica, it was the night Ali woke up at 3 a.m., walked into the bathroom, and came back asking her who she was. Not as a joke, not playing around, genuinely asking, "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" 5 seconds later, recognition returned. "Sorry, baby, I was confused." But those 5 seconds changed everything. Because if Ali could forget his own wife, even temporarily, what else was his brain forgetting? What else was being lost in the fog that seemed to be settling over his mind? That's when she called Angelo Dundee, Ali's longtime trainer, and said, "Something's wrong with him. He needs to see a doctor. And I need you to convince him because he won't listen to me." Angelo had noticed things too, different things but equally concerning, during training sessions, and Ali was still training sporadically in 1980, still entertaining the idea of fighting again despite everyone around him begging him not to. Angelo would watch Ali's movements and see the degradation. The speed was obviously gone that had been disappearing for years. But this was different. This was fundamental coordination breaking down. Ali would throw a jab and his whole body would be slightly off balance, the kinetic chain that connects feet to fist no longer working smoothly. He'd try to slip a punch in sparring and move the wrong direction, as if his brain was sending signals his body couldn't properly interpret. And the tremor. Angelo had seen that in other fighters, old fighters who'd taken too many shots, but never this pronounced in someone who'd been so careful about defense, who'd spent his career making people miss. Angelo had called Ferdie Pacheco, Ali's former doctor, and asked what he thought. Ferdie's response was blunt. Hay has Parkinson's disease. Or something so close to it that the distinction doesn't matter. It's from the fighting. All those shots he took, especially in the later years when he was slower and couldn't avoid them. The brain doesn't heal from that kind of trauma. It accumulates, and now we're seeing the result. Angelo asked if there was treatment. Ferdie said, there's medication that can help with symptoms, but no cure. It's progressive. It gets worse, and the longer he keeps fighting, the faster it gets worse. That conversation haunted Angelo. Because what do you tell someone whose entire identity is built on fighting when the thing killing them is fighting? How do you convince someone to stop when stopping means accepting they're finished, done, no longer who they've always been? Angelo tried once, sitting down with Ali after a particularly rough sparring session where Ali had gotten hit more than he'd landed. Champ, maybe it's time to think about retirement. Really retirement, not just saying it. And Ali, with that diminished but still present pride, had looked at him like he'd suggested surrender. I'm not done, Angelo. One more fight. Then I'll stop. But everyone knew, one more fight was a lie fighters tell themselves. There's always one more. Until there isn't. Until the body quits completely or someone makes the decision for them. Angelo hoped someone would make that decision for Ali before it was too late. But looking at Ali's face, the determination mixed with fear, the knowledge that something was wrong battling against the refusal to admit it, Angelo suspected it was already too late. The damage was done. Now it was just about managing the decline. And the first step in managing it was admitting it existed, which meant Ali needed to see a doctor. A real doctor. A neurologist who could give them a diagnosis they couldn't ignore. That's how they ended up at Columbia University Medical Center in June 1980, in Dr. Stanley Fahn's office, about to spend 3 minutes confronting a truth that would define the rest of Muhammad Ali's life. The waiting room was quiet, sterile, filled with the kind of uncomfortable silence that medical offices always have. People waiting to hear news that might change everything, trying not to think about what that news might be. Ali sat in a chair, hands on his knees, noticeably not talking. For anyone who knew Ali, who'd spent time around him, this was alarming. Ali talked. Always, it's what he did. He filled silence with words, with jokes, with stories, with anything to keep the energy up. But today he was quiet, just sitting there, staring at nothing, hands trembling slightly. Veronica sat next to him, holding his hand, trying to provide comfort while fighting her own dread about what they were about to learn. When the nurse called them back, Miss Stepper, Ali, they stood together and walked down a hallway that felt longer than it should into an examination room where Dr. Stanley Fahn waited. Fahn was in his 50s, a renowned neurologist who specialized in movement disorders, particularly Parkinson's disease. He'd seen Ali fight on television, had admired his speed and skill. But this wasn't a fan meeting his hero. This was a doctor preparing to deliver difficult news to a patient who probably already knew, on some level, what he was going to hear. Fahn shook Ali's hand, felt the tremor immediately, and gestured for Ali and Veronica to sit. Messer Ali, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. But I need to ask you some questions and do a brief examination to get a sense of what we're dealing with. There's no right or wrong answers. Just be honest. Ali nodded, said okay, quietly, and waited. The test began simply enough. Basic cognitive assessment questions designed to establish baseline function and identify any deficits. When did simple become complicated? When did questions a 5-year-old could answer become a challenge for one of the most famous people on Earth? About 3 minutes in. That's when everything changed. Not all at once, but in increments, each question revealing a little more damage, each pause lasting a little longer, until the accumulation became undeniable and the room filled with the understanding that something fundamental had broken in Muhammad Ali's brain and wasn't going to be fixed. Dr. Fahn started with orientation questions, the easiest category.
What year is it?
Ali answered immediately. 980? Good. What city are we in?
Ali.
New York. Also immediate. What's today's date? And here came the first hesitation, not long, just a pause where there shouldn't have been one. June 15th. Dr. Fahn. Close. June 17th. Ali trying to save face. Yeah, 17th. I knew that, but he hadn't known. And everyone in the room recognized it. The date is a minor thing. People forget the exact date all the time. But the hesitation, the uncertainty, the need to guess, from someone whose mental sharpness had once been as impressive as his physical speed, it was notable. Fahn made a note on his clipboard and continued, backwards. Ali looked at him, processing the request. Started with the normal spelling, a W-O-R-L-D. Fahn clarified, backwards. Another pause longer this time. Ali's lips moved silently, trying to reverse the letters in his mind. Finally, E-D. R, a W, correct, but effortful. Veronica, watching from her chair in the corner, felt her chest tighten. This shouldn't be hard. Ali had never been a great speller, had famously not cared much about academics, but backward spelling was about mental flexibility, about the brain's ability to manipulate information. And watching him struggle with it, seeing the concentration on his face for such a simple task, she knew they weren't going to get good news from this appointment. The questions continued. Some Ali answered fine. Oozed the president. Jimmy Carter. Quick, confident. But others created pauses, moments where his brain seemed to stall. What did you have for breakfast? Long silence. Ali looking confused, like he was searching memory and finding nothing. Finally, Veronica prompted from the corner. Toast and eggs. Ali grateful for the help. Yeah, toast and eggs. But he hadn't remembered. Needed to be told. His short-term memory, the ability to encode and retrieve recent information, was compromised. Then came the memory test. I'm gonna say 3 words. I want you to remember them because I'll ask you to repeat them in a few minutes. Ready? Ali nodded. Apple. Table. Penny. Ali repeated. Apple. Table. Fennin. Penny. Hold on to those. Then move to physical examination. Can you hold your hands out in front of you, please? Ali extended his hands. The tremor was obvious, visible even from across the room. Not a subtle shake, but a pronounced trembling that affected both hands, slightly worse on the right. Fahn observed for several seconds. Made notes. Okay. Now I'd like you to walk across the room for me. Ali walked. His steps were small, shuffling, the kind of gait called festination in medical terminology, characteristic of Parkinson's. His arms didn't swing naturally as he walked. They stayed somewhat rigid at his sides. His posture was slightly stooped. Everything about his movement suggested neurological impairment. Can you smile for me? Fahn asked. Ali tried, but his face barely moved. The muscles didn't respond properly. His expression remained relatively flat, masked. Another classic Parkinson's symptom called hypomimia, the reduction of facial expression due to rigid facial muscles. Veronica, watching this catalog of dysfunction, felt tears start. Not dramatic crying, just quiet tears running down her face as she watched medical science document what she'd been seeing at home for months. Her husband's brain was failing. The examination continued for several more minutes, testing reflexes, muscle tone, coordination. But the conclusion was already obvious to everyone in the room. Then Fahn circled back. Remember those 3 words I asked you to remember earlier. And Ali, looking suddenly worried because he'd forgotten he was supposed to remember anything. Long pause, searching his memory. Apple and nothing. The other 2 words were gone. I can't remember the other 2. Fahn! That's okay, Mr. Ali. But it wasn't okay. It wasn't okay at all. And then came the question. The one that would define these 3 minutes. The one Ali would remember, when he could still remember things, for the rest of his life. Dr. Fahn, almost casually, as if it wasn't the most basic question possible. What is your name? Silence. Complete silence. Ali stared at Dr. Fahn like he'd asked something in a foreign language. Like the question didn't make sense. And maybe it didn't make sense, because how could someone not know their own name? How could the most famous name in sports, maybe in the world, become a word that wouldn't come when called? But it wouldn't come. Ali's mouth opened. Closed, opened again. No words, just silence. Fahn waited, not prompting, giving Ali time to process and respond. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Veronica's hand went to her mouth, suppressing a sob because she understood what was happening. Ali couldn't remember his name. His own name. The name people chanted in arenas. The name that had replaced Cassius Clay. The name that meant something. That was his identity, and he couldn't remember it. 4 seconds. 5. Ali's eyes showed something nobody had ever seen there before: panic. Not the performance panic of pre-fight theatrics, but genuine fear. The fear of realizing your brain isn't working. That the thing you've relied on your entire life, your mind, your consciousness, your sense of self, is malfunctioning in a way you can't control or fix. 6 seconds. 7. Fahn still waited, clipboard in hand, watching, documenting. This was a test, yes, but it was also evidence. Evidence of the kind of neurological damage that would need to be recorded, discussed, used to determine treatment. Every second of delay was data, but to Ali, every second was eternity. Was humiliation, was confrontation with a reality he'd been avoiding. He was broken, fundamentally broken. 8 seconds, and then, quietly, almost apologetically, Muhammad Ali, his own name, the name everyone knew, the name that had defined him. Spoken like he was introducing himself to someone for the first time. 8 seconds to remember it. 8 seconds that felt like 8 hours. 8 seconds that changed everything. Because you can explain away a lot of symptoms. You can blame tremors on fatigue, blame slow speech on getting older, blame memory problems on stress. But when you can't remember your own name, when that fundamental piece of identity becomes inaccessible, even temporarily, there's no explaining it away. There's only accepting something is very, very wrong. Dr. Fahn made a note on his clipboard, his face professionally neutral, but his eyes showing the concern he wouldn't verbalize until the examination was complete. Veronica, in her corner, cried harder, no longer trying to hide it, and Ali sat there, hands trembling in his lap, looking at those hands like they belonged to someone else, and probably wondering, what's happening to me? Who am I becoming? And if I can't remember my own name, what else am I going to lose? The examination continued for a few more minutes, but it was perfunctory. The important information had already been gathered. The diagnosis, while not officially stated yet, was obvious. Muhammad Ali had a degenerative neurological condition, probably Parkinson's disease, probably caused by, or at least severely worsened by, the accumulated head trauma from nearly 20 years of professional boxing, and there was no cure, no reversal. Only management, only medications that might slow the progression but couldn't stop it, only the certainty that this was the beginning of a decline that would continue until death. How do you tell someone that? How do you look at Muhammad Ali, the greatest, the man who transcended sport to become a global icon, and tell him his brain is dying? You do it carefully, with compassion, but you do it. Because denial at this point would be cruelty. The truth, however hard, was necessary. So when the examination concluded and Dr. Fahn sat down to discuss his findings, he didn't soften it much. Mr. Ali, based on what I've observed today, the tremors, the rigidity in your muscles, the masked facial expression, the shuffling gait, and the cognitive delays, including the difficulty with word recall, I believe you're showing early signs of a neurological condition. Can you hear your own death sentence and remain calm? Can you process information that fundamentally changes your understanding of your future and not break? Ali tried. God, he tried. Kept his face composed, hands still trembling but folded in his lap, listening as Fahn explained what the symptoms suggested, what the likely cause was, what the prognosis looked like. Veronica asked the question Ali couldn't is it Parkinson's? And Fahn, with the honesty doctors sometimes regret but know is necessary, possibly, or what we call pugilistic Parkinsonism. Parkinson's, like symptoms caused by repeated head trauma. The distinction doesn't change much about treatment or prognosis. Both are progressive, both worsen over time, both will require medication and eventually may require significant lifestyle adjustments. Ali finally spoke. So it's from boxing. Not a question. A statement. Fahn nodded, most likely yes. The kind of impacts boxers absorb, especially to the head, can cause this kind of neurological damage over time. Silence. Then Ali asked the question everyone asks when confronted with terminal or chronic illness. Can you fix it? And Fahn gave the answer nobody wants to hear. There's no cure. But there are medications, levodopa and others, that can help manage symptoms, at least initially. As the disease progresses, they become less effective, but we're not there yet. Right now, we focus on maintaining quality of life as long as possible. Ali absorbed this, or tried to. Then asked another question, the one that revealed he understood the gravity. How long do I have? Fahn was careful. It's not terminal in the sense that it will directly kill you. But it is progressive. Over years, maybe decades, it will affect your mobility, your speech, your ability to perform daily tasks. How fast it progresses varies by individual. What Fahn didn't say, but what everyone in the room understood, the fighting had to stop. Immediately. Every additional punch absorbed would accelerate the decline, would steal months or years of functionality, would make the inevitable worse, faster, more devastating. But even knowing this, even having just spent 3 minutes unable to remember his own name, Muhammad Ali would make a decision that would shock everyone he would fight again. One more time, because stopping meant accepting this was real, accepting he was done, accepting he was no longer Muhammad Ali, fighter, but Muhammad Ali, patient. And that acceptance, that identity death, was harder than any physical death, so he'd deny it. For another year, until Trevor Berbick beat him so badly that denial became impossible, until his body quit so completely that pride couldn't resurrect it, until the thing Dr. Fahn had diagnosed in this office became undeniable to everyone, including Ali himself. But that was later. In this moment, sitting in this examination room, having just failed to remember his own name for 8 seconds, Ali made a different choice. He chose not to believe it. Chose to think maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe he could still fight, still be who he'd always been. Denial is powerful. Denial is seductive. Denial lets you keep going when acceptance would crush you, so Ali denied. And Veronica watched him deny. And Dr. Fahn documented the denial in his notes because denial was also a symptom, not of Parkinson's, but of being human, of not being ready to accept your own decline, of needing to believe that willpower and determination can overcome biology. They can't. But sometimes the illusion is all you have. So you hold on to it, for as long as you can, until reality forces you to let go. The walk from the examination room to the elevator felt longer than any walk Ali had taken. Veronica held his arm, not for his balance, but for her own, needing the physical connection to ground herself after what they just learned. They didn't speak. What was there to say? In the elevator, descending, Ali caught his reflection in the polished metal doors, stared at it, and Veronica, watching him watch himself, heard him say quietly, "Who is that?" She didn't understand at first. What? Ali gestured at the reflection in the mirror. Who is that guy? Veronica's heart broke. That's you, baby. That's Muhammad Ali. But Ali kept staring, and his next words cut deeper than any diagnosis. No. That's not me. I don't know who that is. But it's not me. Because the man in the reflection had Parkinson's, had brain damage, had a future of decline and loss and diminishment. And Muhammad Ali, the idea of Muhammad Ali, the legend, the greatest fighter who'd ever lived, couldn't be that person. Wouldn't be that person. So the man in the mirror must be someone else, some stranger who'd stolen Ali's face, some imposter who had his hands, his voice, his name, but wasn't him. Couldn't be him, because Muhammad Ali didn't get sick, didn't break down, didn't forget his own name. That would be like Superman getting cancer or Batman going senile. Unthinkable, impossible, a violation of the natural order. But it had happened, was happening, would continue to happen for the next 36 years until Ali died in 2016, his body a shell, his mind a fraction of what it had been, his voice silent not by choice but by disease. All of it traceable back to this moment, to this diagnosis, to these 3 minutes in Dr. Fahn's office when the truth became undeniable. In the car, driving home, Veronica tried to find words of comfort. We'll get through this. There's medication. We'll manage it. But Ali wasn't listening. Was staring out the window at New York passing by, all those people living their lives, unaware that in this car, Muhammad Ali was grappling with his own mortality. Finally, he spoke. I can't remember my name, Veronica. The doctor asked me my name and I couldn't remember. How is that possible? The whole world knows my name. And I couldn't remember it. Veronica reached over, took his hand, the trembling one, and held it. You remembered. It just took a second. Ali's voice was hollow. It took 8 seconds. That's not a second. That's forever. 8 seconds of not knowing who I am. What happens when it's not 8 seconds? What happens when I can't remember at all? When I don't know who you are? Who I am? What I've done? What then? And Veronica didn't have an answer, because the answer was that's what this disease does. Eventually. Maybe not for years. Maybe not for decades. But eventually, Parkinson steals everything. Memory, movement, identity, self. And all you can do is watch it happen. Fight it when you can. Accept it when you can't. And try to hold on to the person you love even as they slowly, gradually, inevitably disappear into the fog of neurological decline. They drove in silence the rest of the way home. But the silence was different now. Not comfortable. Not peaceful. Just empty. The silence of people who've received news that changes everything but don't have words to process it yet. When they got home, Ali went straight to the bathroom. Looked at himself in the mirror. Really looked like he was searching for something. And stood there for several minutes. Veronica watched from the doorway, afraid to interrupt, afraid of what he might say or do. Finally, Ali spoke to his reflection. I'm still here. Whatever the doctor said, I'm still here. I'm still Muhammad Ali. I can still fight. I can still be who I am. But his reflection didn't answer. Just stared back with that masked expression, those trembling hands, that body that was already betraying him. And somewhere deep in Ali's mind, deeper than pride or denial or determination, a small voice whispered, no. You're not. You're already becoming someone else. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. He ignored the voice. Had to ignore it. Because listening to it meant accepting defeat. And Muhammad Ali didn't accept defeat. Wouldn't accept defeat. Even when defeat was inevitable. Even when fighting it only made things worse. Even when the wise choice, the healthy choice, the choice that might preserve what little remained, was to surrender. He'd fight. One more year. One more fight. One more chance to prove the doctors wrong, to show the world and himself that he was still the greatest. The fight would happen in Nassau, Bahamas, December 1981, against Trevor Berbick, and it would be sad, painful to watch. Ali slow, clumsy, getting hit with shots he would have dodged in his prime, in his near prime, even in his decline, just getting hit over and over, for 10 rounds, losing clearly, looking old, looking damaged, looking like exactly what Dr. Fahn had diagnosed, a man with a progressive neurological disease who shouldn't be boxing. After that fight, after the loss was announced and Ali sat in his corner looking not disappointed but relieved it was finally over. Reporters asked if he'd retire, and Ali, with what little voice he had left, said, yeah, I'm done. And this time, finally, he meant it. But the damage was done. The years of fighting passed when he should have stopped. The accumulation of punches that accelerated the Parkinson's, the stubborn refusal to accept what his body had been telling him, all of it had consequences. And those consequences would play out over the next 35 years. Slowly, publicly, tragically. In 1984, the diagnosis became official public. Ali held a press conference, his hands shaking, his speech already noticeably slower. I have Parkinson's disease. It's from boxing. But I don't regret it. I do it all again. Brave words. The words people wanted to hear. The words that fit the narrative of Ali as hero, as warrior, as someone who'd sacrifice anything for his principles and his sport. But were they true? Did he really not regret it? Or was that just what you say when cameras are on and the world is watching, and admitting regret would mean admitting you've wasted your life destroying yourself for entertainment? Nobody asked that question, not then. Maybe because they didn't want to hear the answer. By 1996, when Ali lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta, the progression was obvious to anyone watching. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the torch. His movements were rigid, slow, effortful. The act of climbing stairs to the cauldron was an achievement, not a formality. And the world watched and cried, moved by the courage of this man performing on the world stage despite his disease. But was it courage? Or was it just one more performance? One more time being Muhammad Ali for the crowd, giving them what they wanted, inspiration, hope, the illusion that spirit can overcome flesh, when what he might have wanted was privacy, dignity, the right to decline without an audience. We'll never know, because Ali kept performing until he physically couldn't anymore. Kept being Muhammad Ali, the greatest, even as that identity became harder and harder to inhabit, until June 3, 2016, when his body finally quit completely, when the Parkinson's combined with respiratory illness took him, 74 years old, 42 years of disease. 42 years of slow decline from the moment Dr. Fahn diagnosed him to the moment his heart stopped. And in all those years, one moment stayed with him more than most, those 8 seconds in the examination room when he couldn't remember his name. He mentioned it occasionally in interviews, when he could still speak clearly enough to be understood. That was when I knew. When I couldn't remember my own name. That's when I knew something was really wrong. But he never said what he knew, exactly. Never articulated the full understanding that must have come in that moment. Maybe because putting it into words would make it too real, too final, too much like accepting defeat, so he kept it to himself. Kept fighting in his way until there was nothing left to fight with. And when he died, the world mourned, called him the greatest, celebrated his life, his achievements, his courage. All true things, all deserved, but also incomplete, because the full story of Muhammad Ali isn't just about triumph. It's about cost, the cost of being great, the cost of refusing to stop, the cost of pride that won't bend even when bending is survival. And that cost, calculated over 42 years of decline, is measured in moments like those 3 minutes in Dr. Fahn's office, when simple questions became impossible. When, "What is your name?" required 8 seconds of searching a brain that should have known instantly but couldn't find the answer. When Muhammad Ali, the name, the legend, the man, became something you had to remember instead of something you just knew. 3 minutes. That's all it took to diagnose the end, to document the decline, to make official what everyone had been whispering: Muhammad Ali was sick, getting sicker, and wouldn't get better. 3 minutes that defined the next 4 decades. 3 minutes that explained why, at the end, when Ali could no longer speak, could barely move, could only communicate through the smallest gestures, people would look at him and wonder, is he still in there? Does he remember who he was? Does he know what he lost? We don't know. Can't know. Because the thing about Parkinson's, about neurological decline, is that it steals the ability to tell us what's been stolen. Takes away words. Takes away expression. Takes away everything except the shell of who someone used to be. And we look at that shell, whether it's sitting in a wheelchair at a public event or lying in a bed in private, and we wonder, what's it like in there? Is it peace? Is it frustration? Is it nothing? Is consciousness itself fading, or just the ability to express it? Muhammad Ali took those answers with him when he died, took the full truth of what those 3 minutes in 1980 set in motion. All we have is what we saw: the decline, the progression, the slow, steady loss of everything that made him who he was, and the knowledge, painful, undeniable knowledge, that it all traced back to boxing, to the choice to fight, to the choice to keep fighting when he should have stopped, to the choice to value being the greatest over being healthy. Was it worth it? That's the question we keep asking. The question every Ali documentary circles back to. The question that has no good answer because the cost and the benefit are incommensurable. How do you weigh Olympic gold against Parkinson's? How do you balance being the most famous athlete in the world against forgetting your own name? You can't. There's no equation that makes it make sense. There's just the decision, the choice Ali made over and over, to fight, to be who he was, to give us the greatness we wanted from him, and the price he paid for giving it. 3 minutes. 8 seconds of that spent trying to remember his own name, and 42 years spent living with the consequences of all the choices that led to that moment. That's not a tragedy. That's not a triumph. That's just the truth. Complicated, painful human. Muhammad Ali was the greatest, and being the greatest cost him everything, and he paid, in full, in those 3 minutes. and every minute after, until there were no minutes left, just memory, just legacy, just the name, Muhammad Ali, that the world will never forget. Even if for 8 seconds in 1980, the man who carried that name couldn't remember it himself. That's what those 3 minutes revealed. That's what they meant. That's the cost we don't like to talk about when we celebrate the glory. But it's there, always there. In the trembling hands, in the slow speech, in the masked face, in the moments when the greatest name in sports became a word that wouldn't come when called. In those 3 minutes when denial ended and reality began. When Muhammad Ali learned what the rest of his life would be a long, slow goodbye to who he'd been. 3 minutes. An eternity. The beginning of the end. And nobody, not Dr. Fahn, not Veronica, not Ali himself, could stop what those 3 minutes set in motion. They could only watch and document and remember and wonder, was there ever a moment when it could have been different? When Ali could have stopped in time? When the price could have been less? Maybe, maybe not. But the moment when we knew for certain the price was too high, when we saw the cost in real time, when denial became impossible, that moment was 3 minutes long. In a doctor's office in New York, in June 1980, when Muhammad Ali couldn't remember his own name, and everything changed, forever.